Welcome to this explainer. You know, pop culture absolutely loves to paint Hades as the ultimate villain. We all know the image, right? The blue flaming hair, the sinister laugh, always plotting in the shadows to somehow overthrow Mount Olympus. But if you were to travel back in time and actually ask an ancient Greek about Hades, they'd describe someone entirely different. They saw a strict, inevitable, and surprisingly fair manager. So let's look past the myths we think we know and see who the real Lord of the Dead actually was. Okay, let's dive into this, because this question right here gets at the very heart of our biggest misconception. We tend to instinctively equate the Greek underworld with our modern concept of hell, and because of that, we view its ruler as the embodiment of pure evil. But in Greek mythology, the underworld was simply the final destination where all mortals went when they died, completely regardless of whether they were good or bad. And Hades, he wasn't some demonic force. He was literally just the guy assigned to run the place. A lot of people actually think Hades was the god of death itself. But nope, he wasn't. He was the god of the dead, while the actual personification of death was a winged deity named Thanatos. Hades was simply the cosmic jailer. He was the grand administrator holding the keys. And sure, he was stern, unpitying, and yes, cruel, but the Greeks also considered him to be perfectly just. He treated absolutely everyone equally, enforcing the laws of his realm without a shred of prejudice or favoritism.
Section 1. Drawing the short straw.
Now, what's really interesting to consider here is how he actually got this grim gig in the first place. For that, we have to look back to a massive 10-year divine war called the Titanomachy. After Hades and his siblings finally defeated their tyrannical father, Cronus, the cosmos had to be divided up. And according to Homer's Iliad, Hades didn't fall from grace. He wasn't banished down there as some sort of divine punishment for being bad. The three brothers, Zeus, Poseidon, and Hades, literally drew lots for their realms. It was a cosmic lottery. Zeus pulled the sky, Poseidon got the sea, and Hades drew the murky darkness of the underworld. The solid earth, that was kept as common ground for all three to share. So Hades didn't choose the gloom at all. He just happened to draw the short straw.
Section 2. Rules of the Underworld.
So once he took up his post, Hades proved to be a highly effective, albeit terrifying administrator. His main directive was making absolutely sure that nobody escaped his grasp. Entering his realm was a highly structured, super bureaucratic process. When you died, you couldn't just wander in. First, you had to pay the ferryman, Charon, a single coin called an obulus just to cross the river. Then, you had to safely pass Cerberus, that famous ferocious three-headed guard dog who let everyone in but made sure no one got out. Finally, your soul faced three judges, Minos, Rhadamanthus, and Aeacus, and they determined exactly where in the vast underworld you'd spend eternity. It was honestly an incredibly organized intake system. And the geography of this realm? Just as intense. The underworld was defined by 5 rivers, and each one carried a really heavy symbolic meaning. You've got Acheron, the river of sorrow, Cocytus, for lamentation, Phlegethon, which is a river of literal fire, Lethe, the pool where souls drank to completely erase all their memories, and Styx, the river of hate that formed the uncrossable boundary between the living and the dead. This was a misty, gloomy, inescapable environment, and Hades ruled over the whole shebang with complete and absolute authority. And this brilliantly illustrates how Hades handled the few living mortals who actually dared to visit his realm. When the hero Orpheus came down to rescue his wife and played beautifully on his lyre, Hades actually showed uncharacteristic mercy and let her go. Well, with one strict condition, of course. But look at the next 2 visitors. Pirithous arrogantly tried to steal Hades' wife Persephone. Hades pretended to host a feast for him, only to trap him forever in the chair of forgetfulness with snakes coiled around his feet. And Sisyphus, he tried to cheat death entirely. Hades punished him by forcing him to roll a boulder up a hill for all eternity, only for it to fall back down every single time. The lesson here is pretty clear. Hades was generally passive and impartial, unless you tried to steal from him or cheat his system. Then his wrath was absolute. The sheer finality of this realm is perfectly captured in this chilling quote from the great Greek war hero Achilles. He spoke this to Odysseus when Odysseus temporarily conjured his spirit. "I would rather follow the plow as thrall to another man than be a king over all the perished dead." That gloom, that permanent ends to the joys of the upper world, that is exactly why mortals feared Hades so much. It wasn't because he was a demon, it was because he represented an inevitable truth they desperately did not want to face.
Section 3. The Queen of Shadows.
Now, we absolutely can't talk about Hades without addressing his most famous myth, the abduction of his wife Persephone. But when we look at the oldest source texts, like the Homeric hymn to Demeter, the narrative is actually far more complex than a simple kidnapping. It starts with Zeus. Zeus, Persephone's father, secretly promises her to Hades as a wife. So when Hades bursts from the earth in his chariot and takes her, he's actually acting on an arrangement to claim his rightful bride. Of course, Persephone's mother, Demeter, is devastated and furious, plunging the earth into a terrible famine in protest. Eventually, Zeus steps in to mediate a compromise, but because Persephone was fed a pomegranate seed in the underworld, she is bound to return to Hades for 1/3 of the year. To the ancient Greeks, this annual cycle brilliantly explained the barren seasons of winter and the blooming of spring.
So the crucial point is how the other gods actually viewed this arrangement. The sun god Helios captured this perfectly when trying to calm down a grieving Demeter. He tells her, Hades isn't an unsuitable son-in-law among the gods, lord of the many dead, your own brother from the same seed. As for honor, he won the 3rd share back when the division was made. From the ancient perspective, Hades wasn't some creepy outcast. He was a high-status, incredibly powerful king in his own right, and a deeply worthy match for a goddess.
Section 4. God of Hidden Wealth. Let's pivot for a second and look at how the ancient Greeks actually interacted with Hades in their daily lives, because their worship reveals a fascinating duality. They were undeniably terrified of him. I mean, their cult practices were intense. When sacrificing to him, they wouldn't even use a normal altar. They'd pour blood into a pit or cleft in the earth, offering black animals like sheep. They would literally bang their hands on the ground to make sure he heard them from below, and the person offering the sacrifice had to physically avert their face. They just simply did not want to make eye contact with the concept of death. Let's move to and see how this builds into something totally unexpected. Because they were so afraid to say his true name, they used euphemisms to try and get on his good side. The most famous one was Pluton, which literally translates to the wealthy one. Now, why call the god of death wealthy? Because absolutely everything valuable comes from beneath the earth. Think about it. The fertile soil that grows the crops, the sparkling diamonds, the deep veins of silver and gold, it all originated from Hades' subterranean domain. So the terrifying god of death was simultaneously worshipped as the great bringer of agricultural and mineral wealth. And actually, this is exactly where the Romans later got the name for their god, Pluto. But even beneath all those promises of wealth, they never forgot his true nature. Even while hoping for his riches, they used other, much more somber epithets for him, like Agesilos, which translates to the god who carries away all. He was the rich one for sure, but he remained the inescapable end. He held the keys, the gates were locked, and eventually, everyone would become his guest. Which brings us to this final provocative thought to leave you with. If the ancients respected Hades as a necessary, completely impartial manager of the inevitable, and even prayed to him as a vital bringer of wealth, why do we insist on reducing him to a one-dimensional cartoon villain today? Perhaps our modern portrayals say a lot more about our own cultural discomfort with death than they do about the god himself. The real Hades wasn't evil. He was literally just doing the job he drew from the cosmic lottery. I really hope this explainer has given you a totally new, historically accurate paradigm of the Greek underworld. Thanks for joining me, and keep digging beneath the surface of what you think you know.